Okay, welcome to the premiere of Under the Hollywood Sign on What's Up in LA channel. Get ready to dive into the daily routines of the hardworking and dedicated individuals who make up the Hollywood industry, from actors to producers, writers to directors, and all the people working below the line. This show will take you behind the scenes and show you the real faces behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. My name is Faliex. I'm co-hosting this show with Mitchell, and today we have a very special guest with us, Marc Vanocur, a highly acclaimed music composer in the industry. But he's not just any music composer. Marc is a man of many talents with a career spanning over 3 decades, if I'm right. Marc has done it almost all. In this episode, we will delve into his fascinating world and discover how he has managed to maintain such a successful career in the competitive Hollywood industry. So sit back, relax, and interact with us through the chat if you have any question. Let's go for an exclusive inside look into the life of one of Hollywood's multi-talented talent.
Very talented. Wow. Marc, welcome.
Thank you.
Wow.
You're probably wondering who this person is sitting here, considering that fantastic picture was me
That was your life in like 10 words.
30 years ago. It's like, who's the guy that you kidnapped for this? Because it's not the guy in the picture.
It is. And
I was young
and foolish.
and foolish. It is true, 30 years.
30 years. So Marc and I know each other since a very, very long time because we started working in post-productions together. So I'm very happy to have him here and explain what he's done, because like Philippe was saying, he's done so much both in the executive corporate world and in the artistic music composing world as well. So I'll get started with a quick question. Why don't you summarize your background and how you got into the industry?
It's a long and windy road that started even longer than 30 years ago. So when I was very, very young, I discovered a love for the guitar around 6 or 7 years old, and I started studying guitar with a couple fantastic teachers, and I continued studying music for several years. And when I was 13, 14, I fell in love with this shift that the business was making to MIDI and electronic music. And that started to wake me up to the idea that composing for film in a new sort of exciting and electronic way was the direction I wanted to go. The sad part about that is I lost a lot of my classical chops, which I was a pretty decent guitarist when I was young. But it did open me up to the ideas of MIDI and recording with the old Ataris and Commodores, and that really started a love for composing for media. So, oddly enough, in my early teens, and again, it's a long and windy and kind of twisty conversation, but in my early teens, I'm going to look at you from here.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Going back and forth.
You're fine.
I ended up working at one of the places that I was taking music lessons with. It was an outfit in the San Fernando Valley called Valley Arts Guitar. They were very, very famous for making fantastic guitars for incredible jazz musicians like Larry Carlton and Lee Ritenour. And I worked with the owners of the shop, Al and Mike, and then one of the great technologists there was a fellow by the name of Martin Miranda, who introduced me to all of the new gadgetry and fun stuff that guitarists were using in those days. And through my connection with them for several years, I met some incredible composing in the business like Mike Post, and just overall fell in love with the business. After a few years of that, I also got a taste for business in general. And when I started going to college, I decided that I would shift gears, get out of the music business, and end up working in finance. So I became a stockbroker at a very young age. I was 18. I was just starting in college, and started really enjoying the corporate finance world. I learned a ton while I was in school, and was able to enjoy a terrific 5-year career in that business while not touching the arts whatsoever, but going to school for finance at the same time as I was working in it. And I got a real taste for business, and loved every aspect of that. But all of that came to a crashing halt when I was 22. I was in a series of businesses that just weren't working in the corporate finance world, and I found myself just getting out of school with a finance degree, not really able to work that well in that business. And that same year, I got a call through some friends and networking, a fantastic French fellow named Yves, who was transitioning out of his music business and building a post-production business. I knew nothing of post-production at that time, but I knew that many of the advances having been made in the music business were now translating into audio post-production for media. So it wasn't just music anymore, it was sound effects and dubbing and Foley and all the things that go in making soundtracks for films. So he invited me to come to the studio, which I did, which is where I met Michel in 1992. And that started what would become a long career for 30 years in the post-production business. It was just, it was a wild road getting there. It all started with music, as all things in everybody's life have. They start with a passion, that sort of nucleus of where you're going to go. And then it ended up in something semi-related to music, and it was audio post-production. So I started in 92 in audio post, had a wonderful run with Michel early on, which led to a next position with a company called Digital Sound and Picture that was run by John and Nancy Ross. They were doing incredible things that no other facilities were doing yet, approaching things technologically that people just weren't even close to in some of the much bigger studios. Oddly enough, the studio that Michel and I were sharing in the early days at Lazuro was on a street called Weddington. Across from our facility was a company called Weddington Productions, unbeknownst to me, was this top-line audio post-production facility with Academy Award-winning artists that had established it. And from there, I went to Hollywood at Digital Sound and Picture. And 2 or 3 years into my tenure at Digital Sound and Picture, I met a fellow by the name of Michael Minkler, who at the time was getting involved with Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg to design and build what would turn out to be an extraordinary post-production facility for DreamWorks at the time when they were anticipating moving to Playa del Rey. So we had built what I believed was a very, very technically advanced post-production facility at a time when they were just beginning to devise what that transition from the Amblin campus at Universal would look like in a big setting in Playa. As we all know, that campus was never built in Playa del Rey. They ended up staying at Universal, and they stayed in their Amblin property. But one of the partners of that group of designers happened to be Marc Mangini, who was the founding partner of Weddington Productions, of all places. So he asked if I was interested in running that business because they knew that I had a business background, and they also knew that I had approached that business background with an artistic background in post-production, and it seemed to be a good fit for them and for me. So I went to Weddington and signed on as CEO of Weddington Production and had an amazing ride with those folks for many, many years, having ended up selling Weddington Productions to Technicolor, stayed on with Technicolor for several years, operating both in the audio post-production and visual post-production realms because I developed a strong fascination for picture, both having worked a little bit as a in also that sort of new digital realm as digital cameras were becoming the thing. in the 2000s. And from there, stayed with Technicolor all the way until about 2009. And then Mark and Richard and all the team members at Weddington kind of got up out of Technicolor. We ended up moving to Sound Deluxe and Tadio, which were owned at that time by Discovery Communications. It was under the umbrella of CSS Studios, and was with them until about 2012, when they were bought out by a private equity company out of Florida. And then from there, I ended up going to Light Iron, which was a color correction facility also on the technical cusp that many other facilities just weren't able to touch. They were doing things that a lot of other facilities couldn't do. They had specialized in an all-digital workflow. That company was founded by Michael and Peter Cioni, two amazing technologists and business people. And we ended up selling that business. I signed on with them as the chief operating officer. We sold that business to Panavision. I stayed on with Panavision for a little bit. And then lo and behold, in 2015, I decided it was time to strike out and go have some fun and write music again.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to build a facility in Burbank with a dear friend of mine named Galen Walker, who built a company called Media Toaster in Burbank, and I had established a couple rooms inside of Media Toaster, and that became the nucleus of a bigger company, which did visual post-production, we did color correction, we had editorial facilities, I had my music studio, which is what I was most proud of, and we did audio, picture, we did music, and we basically worked on these lower to mid-budget films, able to do everything under one roof. So it gave me access to a lot of different disciplines in the business over the years, but always sort of holding true to my real main love, which was music for media. So that's how we got there. And then sadly, which I'll get to later, in 2020, when COVID shut down most of Los Angeles, especially those of us working in production and post, we had to close that facility, and obviously I had to pick up and move my facility back home, but those were some fantastic days. So we went for 5 straight years working on a plethora of small pictures, and had just an incredible time.
Yeah. What a life.
It sounds like several lives at the same time. It's not one person that we are interviewing today, 6.
It was several people.
I told you, almost did almost
and I laugh because I always say, with the business side of things and the artistic side of things, it's your left brain, right brain that are constantly at war with each other. So, you are ultimately constantly worried about a budget at the same time as you are creating, your next masterpiece.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So you had these separate lives, executive, in finance. I think you studied and you had an MBA, right, if I remember?
Later ended up getting an executive, but certainly not of the kind of caliber that so many of the young people are doing today.
Right.
My life was college and an undergrad in finance, and then later did a lot more studying on my own.
Wow, but that gave you a range of knowledge and expertise in the business that very few composers have, basically.
It was, I hated to say that it was a backup career, because in those days, we didn't think that way. We were very positioned to always follow our passions. But the problem is I had competing passions, because as odd as it sounds, I really loved finance and I loved the business world, but I also loved making music, and I had to figure out how I was going to be able to either combine the two. Strangely enough, post-production in general gave me that vehicle to be able to do both of those things. I was an okay sound editor, certainly not a fantastic sound editor. I was a good music editor, and that's also because I think that was closer to my passion. I worked with David Lynch. I worked with some fantastic directors. Worked on Tales from the Crypt when I was in the, at the peak of my arts at Digital Sound and Picture. But at the same time, I think the business knowledge is what allowed me to kind of stay in the fold. I think I was a better business person than I was an artist ultimately.
What?
It's true. I hate to say it, but I business
So
as
you're
well.
gonna be, you should be a very great.
Can we say that on radio? Is it allowed?
I think I was definitely a better business person, and I think what allowed me to do that business well is I had an incredible understanding of the process, and more importantly, I had a extraordinary appreciation for the people working in that business.
Yeah.
So I was in awe of the kind of work that people like Mark and Richard were doing. Certainly work that I never thought I was that capable of doing, but the best way I knew how to support them was to support their business in the best way possible. Yeah. That kept my career going for all those years. I think if I had depended on myself as a sound editor only, I probably would not have had the career that I had as I did approaching them as a business person.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is great. It's amazing, and for me it's a really Hollywood story.
This is real life. This is a real person here.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe today we will focus on your creative and composer stories and
Sure.
stuff, because also you are a composer with music partner, and we have several albums in exclusivity with our music licensing company. So that would be very interesting to play some of those tracks and discuss them.
Sure.
But before we even get to that, on the composing side, what were the most challenging, what were the challenges that you faced from the beginning? I mean, the toughest challenges that you had to face.
I think, when you're just starting out as a composer, the biggest challenges are getting out and finding clients. We all have those problems. So your first. Here, I wasn't out to support a director or producer financially. I was out to support a director or producer creatively. So I had to rethink and retool in 2015 how I was going to approach that market. I was not a well-known composer in 2015. I just had a strong enough background in post-production to where I knew I could support them technically. I just wasn't 100% sure that I was going to be able to be respected as an artist yet. The wonderful part about having partnered with Galen is Galen was a working producer already at that time for many years, and he came from a world where he knew what the challenges in getting the kinds of films that he was working on done in an economically feasible way. Mm-hmm. So we would approach a film, in a sort of package way where it was music, post-production that included both color and finishing, editorial for sort of affordable packages, but with a professional group of people that had a history in the business. Mm-hmm. So that gave me my step into the door. I knew I could write music. There was never a question in my mind. I just didn't know right out of the gate whether or not it was going to be the kind of music that would fit media, even though that's what I had always been passionate about. Right. And had composers that I loved and, I was fascinated by as a young person, obviously like the John Barrys and the more traditional composers through, today's newer composers like Max Richter and Olafur Arnalds and the neoclassicists of today, which I adore as well. So I had a style. The biggest creative complexity was how was I going to connect that to my first film, how I was going to get my first film. So opening up that studio in Burbank with Galen was my step into that door. Had I started strictly on my own, it would have been even more complicated, I think. And I think our first film at Media Toaster was Dead Awake with a director named Philip Guzman, a really talented young guy out of Texas. We developed a relationship right out of the gate, and we ended up writing a really cool score for it. And so that was the first, go in that facility, and it turned out to be a great success. So the rest of them became a lot easier after that.
Cool. Great. What would you say has been the highlight of your career so far? I mean, and what are you most proud of accomplishing?
Well, I think, there are two, since my career is, I guess there are two aspects of the career. One is the business side of the career. The other aspect of that is the artistic side. And I think they both have accomplishments that I'm equally proud of. Certainly, relationships on the business side of things, I think is what I consider my greatest accomplishment. I have friends now that I've had for decades, Michelle included, because of the connections I made through the business. And no matter how you slice it, I think your relationships are in general your greatest accomplishments. So on the business side, the relationships I was able to maintain throughout the years are my proudest accomplishments. Having served those people over the years, also incredibly proud accomplishment. On the artistic side, I enjoyed being a sound editor, but I think where I felt most connected to the craft and the art was in writing music for media, for film. Yeah. So some of the movies that I worked on, just in my opinion, I may have scored a little better than other things, but in general, I was just so grateful to have, that 5-6 years of consistently working in a field that I was so passionate about. So the accomplishment or gratitude I felt really came from the work that I was doing artistically at that time. So really two separate things, but the enjoyment that I got out of both was equal.
Cool.
I don't know about you, but I want to hear some music now.
Now?
Yeah, it's too interesting. Too interesting. Yeah. So, but before we start, maybe let's decide on a track, and why don't we have Marc run us about the project on the project, so to make sure we understand.
So one film before we put it up that I'm most proud of working on was a film called Child of Nature. It was a film directed by Marcos Negrão. The movie itself is just spectacular. It's about young kids around the world making changes and fixing the problems that adults have left behind. I met Marcos, oddly enough, through, he was in Brazil, and he had heard a track of mine that was on my website. This is a very unusual connection.
Yeah.
Fell in love with the track, came to visit me and said that was the tone and the idea that he wanted specifically for one scene, but also overall throughout the film. Now, the film was challenging because it took place in multiple places around the world, and the music had to be geographically specific to the story we were telling at any given point in the film. So we were in India, we were in Africa, and in this particular track, this song ended up becoming a piece in the film called The Meditation. And it's what attracted me to, what attracted Marcos to our group, and then effectively allowed me to score the whole picture.
Wow, cool. So
it's going to be
let's listen.
Number 2 on my website, which is under interrelated.
Yeah, it's a remorse. That's it?
Yes, remorse.
This is great.
It's funny.
Who's
this is the song actually about the studio visit that you had. I remember now.
Yeah, yeah.
It is the song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
So
when
you
I
had-
heard, when I was listening to this a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it was on your studio and it was on 5.1. I
Mhm.
remember I was surrounded of this magical, sound, and I was like, wow,
I love
amazing.
I love the piano motif and everything revolve around the piano motif from the beginning to the end. Wonderful.
Because
you.
it's so soft but powerful, So you've got something here.
When the funny part about this is that it reminds me of, I think, one of the great mistakes I made was not taking more formal lessons in piano. I think as a composer, that was the thing that was very restricted for me. I love playing guitar, and I was a good guitarist, but it's different when you're at a keyboard and you're trying to, bring a theme together. And ultimately, because that is, the instrument that you're composing with 90% of the time, it would have been very helpful to have more formalized training in piano. And I wish I had.
No worries. you
Maybe
did it.
another life.
Maybe it's my next one. I'll save it.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So strangely enough, so with that film, we talk about some of the challenges. Clearly, that film brought up all kinds of different challenges, primarily because I had to figure out how to do music from a lot of different, geographical locations. So I had to be semi-versed with music originating from India, later music that came from Africa, because there was a whole section in the film that revolved around these young African kids that were making these extraordinary differences in their country. So there was a whole African motif. And so that was a big part of the challenges, not to mention the director and I were seeing visuals so differently. What I was looking at compelled me to write in a particular way. And, in many ways, Marcos and I would discuss what we were seeing, but we seemed to be seeing things in such different ways. And so I think as a composer, when you approach a film, it's incredibly important to have that kind of communication up front to get a very, very good sense of establishing a direction early on.
Yeah, to be on the same page.
To be on the same page, yeah. One of the other tracks that's in that list is the one that we did for Africa that I called Kenya here. It starts the entire sequence of the film in Africa.
Okay, let's listen to it. Here we are.
So this follows a whole motif now, which if you when you see the film, you'll understand a young boy's story navigating his way through this incredibly complicated life that he had, and the things that he was doing to better his life.
Beautiful.
It was certainly it was an incredibly touching part of the film. All the stories are remarkably touching. Some were clearly more uplifting than others, and the secret was to connect with the director in where the happiness from the film was coming from, because from my vantage point, where I stumbled the most is I didn't always see it as optimistically as he did. So I would write in a particular direction, and he would get frustrated and say, I need more energy here. I need things to be more upbeat. And I was very much writing for the picture I was looking at, as opposed to writing for the direction he was trying to take the film in. And that, I think, in terms of challenges when you're working on a film, those are the ones that are sometimes the most complicated to overcome. But there's nothing like good communication to clear those things up. And more importantly, the one thing you do want anytime you begin is to make sure that you're completely transparent and ego-free when you're writing for somebody, because you want to make sure that you bring a good sense of who you are as a musician, because that's why they came to you, but that you're always adhering to that vision that the director and the producers are looking for their film.
To the angle and to serve the movie.
Yes.
And maybe in this case, if you were too much in the same angle of the image, it would have been too much.
Overwhelming.
For people,
Absolutely.
So maybe there is a yin and a yang in the composition of the image and the music, that hope is still here.
Absolutely.
And even if it's really hard to look at it or whatever, the music keep you hey, it's gonna be okay.
So,
absolutely.
So would you say that's the very first step for a composer, to understand the vision of the director before you start doing anything? Then start thinking about what you're seeing and how you interpret what you're seeing.
I think all directors are very different. So I approach this one very differently than I did many of the other films that we were working on. And it also, I think it's very dependent on genre. The one advantage that we had with our group at the Media Toaster Complex, my original Shout Softly studio, is because we had the picture editor working early on with us at the same time, rather than temping a film. I would start to write ideas that would originate at the script level. So it was so early before I even saw a frame of picture.
You build together.
You start to build, because you're together every day, you can bounce these ideas off of each other even before the producer or director walk in for the first time. And then as a film begins its assembly process, rather than doing the traditional temp, which involves grabbing another composer's tracks and trying to cut them and fit them to fit the narrative, you're writing early, using your tracks as the temp, allowing a director to listen on a first pass and say, that's working, that's not working at all. And so you get an early vision of how things are going to have to turn out, and you write right away into that direction.
You are the source.
You have the source.
The movie.
Original.
Course,
So for me, it's twofold. Sometimes I can start as early as at the script level, but I also feel that I do my best work when I'm visually stimulated by what I'm looking at. So on a first pass, on a first cut, I get a very good sense of what the character development is going to look like, and then write individually for each of those characters, as it adheres to that scene.
Okay. Cool. Great.
Very interesting.
And are you asking the director, question like, how do you want your movie sound like? To just have a direction of,
I think you do. I think early on you want to get a direction. You have to remember that a director has been living with this film for so long before they ever come and see you. There have been so many weeks on a set, if not months. You want to make sure that while you want to bring your sound, right, your personality and your vision to something, you want to make sure that your personality is being tailored to the vision of the director always. At the end of the day, your job is to adhere to telling the story the way the director wants the story told.
I think this is the most difficult part.
It is very difficult.
This is the key. Once you have this,
I think
it's
as part of any advice I would ever give an up and coming composer, I would immediately say, make sure you take your ego out of it. Right? Build relationships first, take your ego out of the process, and allow yourself to be guided and crafted by the director's vision, while always staying true to who you are as a musician.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean, you know,
Yeah,
that
it's-
I'm suddenly going to turn in a, you know, a ragtime piece of music when they're looking for a piece from Africa.
Yeah.
It just means stay true to your vision and your overall sort of sentiment and emotion and how you feel musically, but make sure that you're always adhering to the director. And the best way to do that is to stay in constant communication with somebody, to let them listen, to let them guide, and to make decisions around, you know, an evolving process.
Yeah.
Don't ever assume that you're going to turn over a series of pieces and think that that's it. You'll never have to revisit them again.
And hopefully, yeah, it has to be no filter between you and the
And the best way to do that, which is part of what we talked about before, be proud of the relationships that you build with people. Because the easiest way to get that kind of honesty between two people is build a strong rapport.
Yeah.
Make sure that you establish
And
trust
same,
between both of you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
We're learning stuff today.
Yes. So I'm lost. So
Maybe one question was that you playing the guitar on that last
It
track?
was, yeah. Yeah, it was it's a nylon string.
I recognized your sound.
So it's funny you say that, because that's with my wife too. It's when something comes up on, if I have it playing from my phone into the car, right away she'll say, "Oh, that's you." And my mother does the same thing. She'll say, "Oh, I know that sound. That's you." Even if she doesn't know the piece of music, you know, it's your sound that's
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
through.
yeah.
You have a style. We all have a style.
Yeah.
That's what makes us individuals as musicians. But there is something very similar to the music that I write. You know, and even if it's a completely different genre, you'll hear that style come through.
but this is the key also of a composer, you know. Beyond all the technique, beyond all the I don't know what, you know, it's his way of communicate his
Yes.
his music
Yes.
through the. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So, and did you mention earlier another title to?
So completely different type. So from there we did. Actually, it was a year before. I don't completely remember the timeline, but I did another movie called American Dresser, which was a movie with Tom Berenger. Galen produced that one, actually. Worked with some fantastic people on that film and had a blast. The main title for that film is this helicopter shot of just a large open field. The music is supposed to revolve around guys on motorcycles. It's a road trip of guys on motorcycles. So I wanted something large and spacious and a little bit more traditional in terms of its orchestration. So we did a hybrid with some acoustic guitars and then, of course, a string section.
Okay,
and it's
cool.
the main title on American Dresser.
So, let's hear it. Listen to it. Imagine the moto, the biker.
So that leads into another scene that opens on a funeral, unfortunately, and the rest is history. And that the composition in that film changed dramatically throughout the course of the piece. There were some that were just hard-hitting rock tunes where we just picked up some electric guitars and had a fabulous time, and some of it was just difficult orchestration that revolved around some incredibly intense moments between Tom Berenger's character and his family throughout the course of the film. and the demons he was facing as he was riding across the country to deal with the loss of his wife. So there were a lot of emotions in that film, but we had a great time with it. Absolutely great time.
Cool.
So I was very lucky, very lucky. And like I said, I those 5 years that I had with the Media Toaster group, I think were by far the most fun artistically. We just had a great collection of different kinds of genres of films. So we were able to launch into Dead Awake, which was, again, the first one. We did a really cool main title sequence for that. And what's fun about working on horror films is you can do these sort of death beat, hard-hitting, nine-inch nails sounding tracks, and then just right away go into an orchestral, Bernard Herrmann hit scare out of Psycho. And, we worked on those. We worked on dramas. We worked on kind of a lighthearted comedy. I worked on 2 faith-based films, Miracle in East Texas and Let There Be Light. And every one of those was kind of an adventure in the scoring process, because it really forced you to use different chops as a musician. Yeah. So, it was just a great time. I think
it's another story every time, so it's another challenge, and you have to reinvent yourself, but still keep in your tracks.
Yeah.
And this is cool.
Yeah.
This is great, I'm really happy.
Fantastic. I would love to hear one track that we've got in our library, from the Music Partner Library, because we got like 3 albums from you, I think.
You did. We did. So one album, I think, for fun, I had some great influences when I was young. Obviously, Philip Glass. John Barry was a big influence for me. I thought John did some incredible scores, Out of Africa being one of them, naturally. Mm-hmm. And so I did one which was a tribute to John, and I'm trying to remember what we called it in our
Remembering John.
Remembering John.
Because just for the story, Music Partner is our sponsor for this show, and Music Partner is the music library we own with Mission.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you did some great tunes for us.
And that was fun. That was a new process for me, because I had never written for a library before. Usually I'm a very sort of visually stimulated person, where I have to see stuff on screen to make it work. But in this case, I was able to imagine and then write as if I was looking at something. And ultimately I was writing for a library, and I really enjoyed that process.
So what you want to listen
Remembering
to?
John.
Remember, is that what it is?
So
I think that's the title.
let's see. This is
We've got the library in front of us.
All right, let's go down a little bit. So those, I believe, we did. Let's go down. No, I think, is that the right one for?
Change the album, I think.
Oh no, that's correct.
That's correct. Film Composer Tribute.
Film Composer's Tribute,
Yeah.
and then we're going to go down a little bit. So Barry Authentic was a good one.
Yeah.
And then I think we had one down at the bottom as well that was for that. But yeah, Barry Authentic is a good one. Sure.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a slow-moving orchestral. What's fun about these is that we can talk about some of the ways we were able to make them work, because without having an orchestra.
Fantastic strings. Really nice strings.
And we're going to put a shout out to Spitfire Audio for all that.
Good job, guys.
But you know how to make it working very well. You have the trick. I don't know how you do this, but it sounds big with you. And this is. It's always minimum, but powerful again. There we go.
Yeah, the things that we can do today versus when, I started even in the mid 80s, of course, that were nowhere near. But the virtual instrument libraries that are available today for composers are like nothing I've ever heard. And honestly, you can always sort of point in the direction of who started the process the most effectively. But Spitfire Audio, when they released their original symphonic strings, which is what started Paul and Christian's career, I don't know that they've ever really been as properly emulated. They just have a way of capturing strings in general and string players, both at Air Studios. They've recorded, I think, all over London. But the work that they do isn't just about building a film library. Or I should say a or music library. They're essentially trying to build a tool set for composers that I don't know is equally paralleled by a lot of other manufacturers of virtual instruments. So for them, I give them a tremendous amount of props. And I think I wrote Christian many years ago saying, I have to thank you completely, because if it wasn't for you guys doing the kind of work that you're doing, I'm not sure I'd ever be able to deliver the kind of work that I want to deliver.
The great tools, this is also the...
Very important.
Yeah, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, okay, cool, great. So, so you know what? Now I can show where you do all your stuff.
Yeah, so that's
guitars.
that's the old studio. So I had to. That studio was two things. So we were doing obviously both music in there. I would convert it to color. So if you look, this is back at when we had the studio in Burbank.
Yeah.
But if you look to the right, there's actually a resolve panel there. So I was doing color correction. In a couple of the other rooms that we had, we were doing picture editorial. We had a QC department. We had a sound group, so that was cutting sound at our facility. And then we were working with a studio down the street that, strangely enough, another partner of Michel and mine, a fellow by the name of Patrick, was mixing a lot of that in his studio down in Burbank. So it was a really tight-knit group. We knew how to work well together, primarily because we had done a lot of pictures together. So this was the space for me, and it was a nice. It was a nice place to work. I loved it. I loved my facility. We had a small sound booth there. Yeah. Where I could fit 2 or 3 string players if I ever had them. Of course, a guitarist.
It was perfect.
It was just perfect for some live recording, but we didn't do a lot of it. But when we did, we had the space. And then, unfortunately, in 2020, we got hit with the same thing, unfortunately, game over, that many other artists in the city suffered with, which was the beginning of COVID. And we had a few shows that were lined up to get going. Some of them were, I think, 2 shows for Discovery, and then we had 1 more feature film that was scheduled to start. And sadly, COVID shut down the city. It certainly shut down all the artists in the city for a pretty long period of time. And we had to lose this space. So then I had to uproot this space and move it into the space that it's in right now, which was a great space that I had at home, a small, it was a bedroom that we converted. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it works equally well. I think you have a photo of it in there.
Thanks to plugs.
Yeah, thanks to,
you could have been...
this is it here, the one you're showing now. So this is the space that I moved into. Yeah. And I was still able to maintain a 5-1 environment. That's still back in Burbank. So,
I'm stopping there.
Playing a dulcimer. Me looking confused playing a lap dulcimer. And so, and this was just such a great space. And I think on this picture, Miracle in East Texas, because we were doing kind of a southern vibe.
Oh, you're like,
yeah, we had, so we had a dulcimer, we had pedal steel, and there's my son playing with my scopes.
Hello? Oh, it's him.
That's him. He was doing all the color correction for the films. We didn't tell anybody. Now, this is back in my new space. So that's my new sound space, my new booth. I had a mic there. I had all my guitars hanging. It was a little tighter than what I was used to in Burbank, but it's still functional. And so I rebuilt this space to accommodate a few new synths, but still most of the work I do is in the box. So it was still a lot of virtual instruments.
Okay,
And
cool.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, still the booth,
yeah.
and I think I should have other pictures coming. Wait a minute.
I think that's most of them anyway.
Oh,
Oh, so that was
So
a
the- I
photo.
mean,
That's
yeah.
my wife and I
Heineken.
at the
Hello.
Child of Nature premiere. That was a fantastic premiere, and they showed the film to a live audience for the first time. It was wonderful to hear everything play and to watch everybody's reaction to the film. Again, for those people that haven't seen it, if you have children, I highly recommend
Yeah.
the movie. It's just an uplifting portrayal of how extraordinary kids can really be. There are so many fantastic messages in that film, and worth every child getting a taste of them. And I don't want to get too far off track, but we often forget just how lucky we really are. Most of us, but there is a subset of people that really suffer and struggle.
Yeah.
And most of that suffering and struggle is in many ways sort of our indifference to that kind of life condition. And what this movie has done is it's brought those things to the forefront and showed some incredibly courageous kids that are willing to make the changes necessary to make life a better place for everybody. So I highly recommend the film if you haven't seen it. It is on streaming, probably on every streamer by this point. But yes, look it up. It's Child of Nature.
We will. So have another picture.
Yeah, that's me talking to the interviewer
Oh, it's interview.
on the
Okay.
red carpet.
Okay, cool. Great. So guys, so where are we? We have some few minutes left. We have a lot of questions.
Okay, well, I'm going to race through them. There will be one-line answers for each.
We barely scratched the surface of what Marc has done in his life. So this is 1/6 of his lives.
We'll stick to just the music part.
So, I don't know, what inspired you to become a music composer?
Film. So the joy. So it's funny. Music has been a part of my life from the time that I was born. I have great photos of me with headphones on, listening to every possible genre of music imaginable from 2-3 years of age on. My parents, my father, my mother, my stepfather have always been incredibly encouraging of my music career.
This is very important.
It is very important.
Support.
To be supported. Yeah.
Credit my parents 100% for pushing me in that direction, even over the business career. So while I was more the practical one, thinking I had to have a secondary career, they were the ones really pushing me to stick with the arts. So I give them an incredible amount of props for that. They were the ones that paid, obviously, for my music lessons, and the ones that encouraged me to build a studio in the bedroom and to do all the things that parents are so brilliant at doing to nurture and foster their kids' passions. So I'm very appreciative of that, and it never left me. The reality is I can't go a day without listening to music ever. It just, to have it missing in my life it's such a dilemma that at the end of a day, if I know that I didn't take the time to listen to something, whether I'm listening to KUSC, and I'm listening to classical, or I'm listening to some rock or whatever it is, that even today's pop and hip hop, I need something, and that's what keeps me going. So from the very get-go, music has been a part of my soul, and it never left me.
Cool. So, what is your creative process like when composing a new piece?
So,
If
like
you,
we talked about it a little
feel
bit.
it,
It's we kind of touched on what motivates the beginning process of it, which is usually reading a script if I'm writing for media. Now, I will, I out that there's a big difference between writing a song and a piece of music that's specific with lyrics that isn't necessarily related to new media. I'm not a great composer when it comes to writing songs. I feel like in order for me to write at my best, I need to be stimulated by either a script or a storyline or visuals, which I think makes me more of a media composer than it does a songwriter. So really for me, the beginning process is getting a script and then ultimately starting to see the assembly of a picture.
Did you ever write lyrics?
I have
Or-
not
no?
really. No, I've never written lyrics.
Okay.
I can say that definitively. I've never written lyrics. All my work has been always instrumental,
Okay.
and it has always been essentially revolving around media for film. Yeah. Media, I should say, music for media. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How do you approach the different genre from horror to faith-based features and things like that? Because this seems like so hugely opposite spectrums.
They're very different. It really varies. Even horror films don't necessarily mean that you have to resort to all of those expected scares and the big hits and the over-the-top work. Sometimes you can write very dramatic scores for horror films and have it work every bit as effectively. I worked on a movie for Philip, the person that I had done Dead Awake for, called Sleep No More. And much of that film, he wanted a very 80s motif. So the main title for Sleep No More was an 80s, a little bit of a knockoff of the Stranger Things approach. But there were many, so, it was an 80s electronic motif to start with, but that film very quickly migrated into a more orchestral, dramatic piece with the occasional big hit for the horror moments. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be that dramatically different from genre to genre. You don't have to necessarily follow, the expected plan. It's really more about just adhering to what the director is looking for, more than it is just the genre of the film.
Okay, cool. And what advice do you have for aspiring music composers, or young people?
We'd probably
Like us.
Oh, please. Honestly, we could probably spend a whole hour.
Yeah, of course, but
going through it. I think if I had to really summarize it,
yeah.
it's funny. And today I would present a very different case than I would have even 15 years ago. The business, for lack of a better word, is significantly less lucrative than it used to be, which means it has become much more complicated to build a career, or I should say a financially fulfilling career in the music business, which means that the approach has to be more about fulfilling a need to tell your story, a need to do what you're passionate about. So my advice would be, don't set it aside, assuming that, why would I ever approach this? I'll never make any money. My advice would be, pursue it, but make sure you pursue it with the addition of some form of stable base career.
Yeah,
meaning
backup. Yeah.
I hate the word backup because
No,
it sounds so dirty. So many people hear backup and they think, then I don't get to spend the time that I want doing what I want to do, which isn't necessarily true. You can work weekends and you can work evenings doing what you're passionate about, but I think that you have to approach that responsibly, and you have to say, if I'm going to have a family, if I'm going to strike out on my own, I need to be able to know that I have the kind of financial resources that it's going to take to, migrate into that business and do it financially responsibly. So pick up another career, study something else in addition to music. And forgive me, Berkeley, for saying this, but, be careful with the kind of school debt that you accumulate. Make sure that the type of debt you accumulate is one that will effectively pay off in the career that you choose. Yeah. I don't know in this day and age, with the difficulties around earning a living in the composing business, if racking up $200,000 of school debt around music is anymore. So that's not to be condescending to music majors. That's not to suggest that it's impossible to make it in the music business, but making it today it looks very different than it did 20 years ago.
Yeah, it is risky now.
It's much riskier, and I would say significantly less lucrative. The deals are essentially falling apart, both with residuals, and they're getting much more complex with upfront fees. So I would say be careful with the way you approach that business. But that's not to say don't do it.
Yeah.
Everybody should do it if they're
That's
passionate
really
about
worth
it.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's you can't know it before, but anyway, you have to do it. And especially living in LA, which is very expensive, and you can fall like in a few months.
It can
So,
get very
yeah.
expensive very quickly. The beautiful part about the sort of remote world that we're living in now is you can live almost anywhere and still be a fully functioning composer because
Yeah.
ultimately you are working virtually with almost everybody. The other piece of advice on that front in terms of everybody, I would say make sure you network more than you've ever networked in your life. It's not just about selling yourself. It's about connecting with established people in the business and getting advice, connecting, working inexpensively for another composer. Do something that connects you with directors, producers, find your way in through LinkedIn, through any of the social media sites that you're comfortable with, and connect. Make sure that you network. The only other piece of advice I would tell anybody, know that you all have a value and never work for free. I can't emphasize that enough. I'm not suggesting that you won't work inexpensively when you're first starting out, but never work for free. And the reason behind that, and this applies to every industry that you can touch, no matter how wonderful your work ends up, you'll always be remembered as the person that's willing to work for free. And that's just a sad state of human nature. Nobody does it purposefully. They're not trying to hurt you. It's just that's the impression that you give. You're always going to be that cheap solution to somebody else.
It deserves you. So
And when somebody does, make a big film that has a real budget, they're going to go to a composer that doesn't work for free because they're going to assume they're getting a better job, and now they have a budget. So don't ever get tricked into working for nothing. Your time has a value, and make sure that you charge for it.
Okay. So I think we should have a last question, Michel. Choose the question.
What is your favorite genre?
Oh gosh, drama for sure. So human drama for me, going back even to the filmmaking genre for me as a young person, I loved movies like Kramer versus Kramer and Ordinary People, Midnight Cowboy. Anything that revolves around
Human stories.
real human stories will always be the thing I will gravitate towards even now as an adult. That's still my favorite genre. But in terms of the writing music, I love to write for all genres because it forces you to think a little differently from genre to genre, and it really exercises your chops as a musician.
Wonderful.
Yes. So Marc, we have to let you go. But
Did we go an hour already?
Yeah. More than an hour.
Oh.
So, but it was great to have you. Really. And,
I had such a good time. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much. And you come back when you want,
I'll be here tomorrow.
Tomorrow we go to live number 2.
Every Wednesday. So thank you. And do you want to say a last word?
No, I just thank you, everyone. And this was such a great experience. So thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. And and good luck with the show.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.